Good morning. Today I'm going to work on the black paint some more in the background. I'm hoping I can finish it. So let me just immediately get started. I'm shifting over to my overhead cams. Now you can see that I have the painting upside down on my workbench. And that's because I wanted it slanting down to the top. What we're looking to accomplish, and I'll show you my reference photo also upside down, is when I get over in this corner, I want to leave it pretty much with the yellow tone, with very, very pale grays here and dark starting around your arm, dark coming up from the bottom. So I'm going to work from what is the bottom of the painting, top as we're looking at it right now, and work my way down to the top. And because of gravity on this slight slant, it's going to cause the paint to run in the general direction that I'll be working toward. Now, if you saw the very first video I did when I put down the yellow, I'm going to start very much the same way, wetting the paint. Now I'm using a hake brush, which you should be used to me using at this point. And that's because it's very soft. I don't have to press. I can just wet the paper very gently without really disturbing it. I do want to come up into that one little spot there. All right, and I want it to be slightly wetter towards the top of the paper for two reasons. It'll take me a little bit longer to get to this region, but also it's where the paint is lighter. Now, I just accidentally went over her hair, which I did not want to do. So hopefully some of that will dry out. Actually, I'll grab myself a couple paper towels. Now I am wetting down into this region where I already did black. Trying very hard to stay above her arm because I don't want the black running in there. Like I did on this area, I'm going right over the equipment. There's one more microphone up in this area that I will paint around. You want to remain outside of her hair. Now, if a little bit of gray gets on there, that'll be all right. But mostly I was looking for a little bit more highlighted part of her hair there. All right, one more wet coat on this upper half. It may still dry out before I get there, but hopefully not. This should be a pretty quick application of paint. Even though I am working around some equipment at the bottom, I'm not too worried if a little color doesn't spread up into that area. All right, so I'm going to use the smaller hake. Well, maybe not, actually. No, let's not use that. I'm going to use the same brush that I used when I put the yellow paint on. So this is that very soft but inexpensive brush that I got from the hardware store. I'd rather not load this much black paint into the hake because I like to try to keep them as clean as I can. Now the black paint on it's been a couple days since I've used these, so actually I'm going to add a little bit of water in. Give them a quick stir. So the one on my right, which Just double checking you can see. Let me turn this up, move them up there a little bit. Yeah, so this color over here is the one that is made out of ultramarine blue and quinacridone burnt orange, and it's got a little bit of a bluish tint to it when I thin it out. And the one on the left that may look a little reddish in the container really is quite a neutral black. If if I put the two of them next to each other, then you do see a slight reddish tint in the paint, but for the most part, it looks really quite neutral. When I first put it on, it might look, no, it does look quite black. So we want, okay, there is a little section here. So there's a little bit of the drum head that still continues over to this edge. And I'd like to keep that clean. Probably should not have wet that area. And there's a monitor there for the singer to be able to hear herself. Now I'm going to alternate a little bit between these two blacks. Kind of let them intermingle with each other. I'm going to come back because I would like to get this paint going up higher into the rest of the painting fairly quickly. Now, because the first color was a little bit wetter, there's a couple things I want to do here. I do want to try to, because I had wet the drum head, and I don't really want that being black, I'm just going to try to dry this a little bit. And I'll come back in with the black paint there. And let me get my other hake out. And because I do want some gray on this monitor, it's a speaker that the musicians can use to hear themselves. I am gonna wet along the edge of that paint because I do want a little of that kind of creeping in. I want a little bit of a grayish tint there. Oops, it's very wet. And what I think I'll have to do, I want this gradating down a little bit into this piece. So I'll put a little up here. And pull it down so that is a little bit a little bit of gray over the entire monitor. I don't want to lose the shape of the monitor, so I am going to have to watch how much backflow I get. All right, now I was pulling my smaller brush out because we're going around this, the microphones. Right now I want to leave the microphones without a lot of black paint on them so I can come back in a more controlled manner and put as much gray on here as I'd like. But I don't want that rough edge. So I will touch that now. Allow a little bit of the gray to blend in there, but I'm going to leave some of it clean, or as clean as I can leave it. So that the microphone stand does remain predominantly yellow. Now I do intend to come in with more gray anyway, so having a little bit here is not a problem. Now this other guy, the black has actually crept further in on the stand than I wanted it to. So I'm going to grab some paper towel and see. Looks like I can lift that pretty well and have a much softer edge, which is what I'd prefer to have until I go back in a more controlled manner. All right, I did have one more little piece of equipment sticking up there, but I don't think I need it. All right, so, oops. The downside of the hardware store brush is it splits like this, and then it makes it a lot harder to control where I'm hitting it. So working around these mic stands becomes a little bit tricky. And probably should have come in with a slightly more finesse brush to begin with. All right, which tells me I don't really want to do around her with that brush because I'm afraid I won't be able to control it. So I'm going to break down and use my hake. It also is a nice excuse to bring in the other gray, the other black gray that is a little more neutral. And I will use my small brush to fill in this little gap so I can be a lot more careful around her skin and her shirt so that I'm going right up to the edge without going into the skin. All right, now with the hake, I have a lot more control. But I do find that, you know, I can see pretty well on one side, but on the other side, unless I was to flip the paper around, it's harder to see. So I prefer to come in with my little brush on the inner side of that curve. Now on this outer side, again, it's in the right angle that I can see. I'll do this one little tip at the bottom. I don't, you know, I don't want to permute the shape of her arm. And when coming up around the microphone again, I'll flip back to the smaller brush Now I do want to have it be a nice crisp edge, which means I have to use the tip to do that. And not a bleeding edge, so and when I'm doing this kind of careful painting around the microphones, I'd prefer to not talk because I'm trying to really concentrate on the edges. All right, now should be able to go back to the less expensive brush. I'm going to put my hockey in the clean water to have it give it a chance to get clean. And I will come back to that brush perhaps, but for right now I'm in kind of big open spaces where I think I'm pretty safe with this brush. Now maybe, we'll see. Yeah, I have a lot harder time controlling the edges with that brush, so yeah, I'm trying to avoid having a yellow halo around her arm, but I'm also trying to avoid going into her arm. So now we've got a little tiny halo. I can nudge my way up there. All right, now at this point I'm adding more water to my brush because I do want to start shading to a lighter gray as I come up here. Now I'm going to take a little bit smaller brush that I know also has pretty soft bristles on it and wet along the edge of her hair so she doesn't feel totally, I don't want her to feel pasted on. So I want to wet along those edges because I did pull a little bit of her hair color out beyond the edge. And if some of that shines through, that's probably a good thing. So there we go. I think that looks a little better. All right, and I do need to keep adding more water because I've got a lot of paint in this brush. It's the color of black that goes more towards the bluish gray. Now in her hair, I'm a little less concerned. About whether I get the shape exactly right. But as I said, I do want to have her feel like she is part of the scene and not pasted on the scene. So coming back again with this wet brush to soften along that edge. Now a little more water. Actually, I'm going to keep getting a lot more water because I want this to be quite a bit lighter than what I had at the bottom. And as I migrate over here into towards what is currently my left, but it's really the right of the painting, okay, so I do want this to be a fairly gradual transition, so I just did a little bit of wetter paint. All right, now, before I keep going, I'm using my mostly clean lighter Hake, and I'm softening those edges right now because this side, actually, I might as well go back to the bigger brush. This side has gotten dry in that short period of time. And I do need this to be wet for the paint to move properly. And even this area that I'm integrating into, I need also to be slightly wet. So to make this all work properly, I need to act pretty fast, and I'm actually going to grab a little of each black. I will come back here in a second with the slightly smaller brush to go along that edge. I think I'm going to eliminate that microphone there, although I shouldn't, because I do have the mic stand coming up. So okay, so I probably shouldn't eliminate it. Let me pull at least some of this back out. That's about where it is. Use my paper towel to dry this area a little bit to keep the stand uncovered. All right, and now I'm taking a lot of the paint out of my brush, and I'm going to bring it down over this area that I had intentionally painted a little lighter, knowing that when I brought this paint in and kind of integrated the two halves, I was going to be strengthening this spot a little bit, and I wanted it to be a little lighter than the part that I just put paint over so that that gradation could happen. And I'm pulling a little bit of the dark paint out in this direction. I will come back in here with the smaller brush. And now I'm trying to get mostly back to clear water. Now I do want to have a pale color right in here, and let these two join up, which is why I had to work fairly quickly. Let's see, the mic's gonna be there. So now here's the trick. All of my water is a little dirty, so I should have brought an extra bin to put it in. I'll at least pour as much of that out as I can. Put a bunch of clean water in here. And I'm trying to clean the brush just in the upper part. Actually, there's probably too much paint in there, so let me use the smaller hockey that I know is pretty clean. Just to come up into this area, let there be a few pale gray tinges in that, but mostly I'm going to leave that alone. All right, now I do want, now that I am leaving this additional microphone stand in this area, it does have a microphone sitting in it, which is that shape that we're seeing. And I want to eliminate that little yellow halo, as I mentioned earlier. Plus, because of the slant on the board, a little of that darker paint had pulled away from her arm. And I wanted to get that back in there for some consistency. Now there's still one little spot. Now, of course, I can't lean on the paint because it's wet. So, one little yellow area here. Okay, actually, there's one little one there too. All right, now I clean that brush out. I'm drying it on my towel. So the brush is only a little damp, and then like I did on the other side, I want to wet around the edge of her hair so it doesn't look like we have a hard edge between the paint that's black surrounding her. And in here you can see where the black encroached, and that looks really nice because it sort of adds this curvature to her hair. I'm using a really, really soft touch because in areas where I feel like I need to integrate the paint a little bit, I need actually a little bit of this gray coming into here. There we go. All right. Oops. I see one spot around this finger that was left yellow. There we go. There. All right, so that's the trick when you are, you know, there's always this turmoil. Do I want to do the background first and then paint the figure, or do I want to do the figure first and then paint the background? And there is no right answer. And for me, I do it, every painting is, you know, I decide what's the right answer for this particular painting. And on this one, I did decide that I wanted to do her first, because on the last painting that I used a black and gray background on, I covered the figures with masking tape to protect them. So, you know, what I'm doing right now is exactly what I tell you not to do when I'm teaching. You don't come in when paint is wet and try to add more paint to it. That's just plain stupid, and I know better. So now that I've done that, I've got to add more. And now what I have to do is pull this out all the way to make it integrate with what I'd already done, and hope that I don't cause a really weird line here where we're joining. Now, I went back to the neutral instead of the bluer paint in that one spot. And that too was a mistake, because it was going to be obvious that I had a line there. Now, I do want this to be lighter at the top. So since I now have this huge ocean of paint flowing down the paper, I need to just really add a lot of water to it to kind of pull it down and get it to that lighter tone I want. But it also means, you know, I need to just kind of continue this all the way around here. Now, you know, this part I admit was lighter than I wanted it to be. So, okay, that's evening it out fairly well. What I don't know is where I just stopped along this border, if that's going to give me a problem. There is a little hair from the brush that fell into the paint, but I believe when it dries, I can take that off, and it should not show that line of the hair there. Okay, now let me again try to clean this brush. No, it's too dirty. I'm going to go wash the brush in the sink to get this paint out now, because these waters have gotten too dirty. And then I'm going to come back into this corner one more time with some wet paint. No, that is going to give me a mark. So now I need to, yeah, this is why you don't go back over your wet paint, because you do nothing but give yourself heartache. All right, so now I need to come back in here, re-wet this. That is, of course, about where I want it, but I need to blend it out and add a little more water in here, blend it out again, so that I'm working the dark up into the lighter paint. And now that it's all fairly equally wet again, it should integrate correctly, but I do need to have a clean brush in order to finish that last corner. So I'm going to take off my microphone for a moment, run over to the sink, get my brush clean, and then I'll be back to finish that corner. Okay, now my brush is clean and wet, so I can come back in this corner and leave just a smidgen of gray like I did before, but this little area had gotten a little bit too grayer than I wanted it. So now I'm going to actually flip the painting around. And got a lot of paint on my table, but I'm gonna move this to the side. It's casein I was using on a previous painting that I actually need to return to, and so I haven't put the paint away. I need to do some edges on that painting. All right. Now, this is still wet enough that I can just kind of wet this area gently and blend this little area out a smidgen. What we're seeing is the line between the first, where I had stopped down here, and where I just joined in. And you're probably thinking, aren't you just repeating the same mistake? And I'm hoping not. Because what I'm trying to do this time is actually lift a little bit of that base paint off so that that line isn't quite so obvious. And I just went over her fingertip a smidgen, so I need to get that off before it dries. There we go. All right. I see another little hair over here in the one that was up here. So once that all dries, I'll remove those two hairs. They're from the brush, and then I will come back in to these microphones when it's all totally dry. Revise those a little bit in terms of the shadows on them, probably add a little bit of yellow touches like I did down here. But I actually have one stand here and the top of what I keep referring to as a cymbal, but it's really one of those, there's a foot pedal, and the drummer, it has two metal heads and it pulls them together. And I honestly don't know if those are referred to as cymbals or not. But I do need to do a little bit on these to give them a little shadow, because this symbol over them is going to throw a little shadow along this top. Plus I wanted to blur out this end because I think it should be going just a smidgen further. So I'll be working on some of these mic stands as well as finishing up these over here, and I'll work a little more on the monitor because it's a good start for the monitor. But I'm going to need to do a little bit more on that in order to kind of refine the shape and make it a little clearer what it is that we're looking at. And the little edge here, which is dry enough that I can do this, it shows some little water effects along the edge. And so since this brush is slightly damp, I can come along there, I can eliminate those water edge marks and at the same time create the hard edge of that piece of equipment. And now over here, I'm gonna probably have to bring a little of the black paint in to kind of fix that shape. Over here, we actually have a shaded side to the piece, to the monitor. And so, I need to come along this edge which is kind of where the side of the monitor and the front join. Lighten that a bit, or wet it a bit, and then come and dab. Remember, I don't really pull on the paper, I press and lift in order to get the paint off without really dragging a lot on the surface. You could probably hear just a smidgen of dragging, and but not enough to really damage the surface. And because this had dried in this area where I had worked first, it was ready for me to come in and do that. Whereas, when I tried to come back up here too soon, it was literally too soon. Okay, now, when I did this second coat, I did bring a little bit of paint up onto her hair of the gray that I don't really want there. I don't mind it looking like there's a little bit of edge going on where her hair is curling under, and it's getting some shadow on this side, but on this side where the light is coming from, I really don't want that happening. So over here it looks convincing, but over here it just looks wrong. And so I can come back into the hair and do that. It's dry enough there for me to make that correction. And while I'm doing a little finesse work, I might as well do this little spot too. It's got a little bit more creeping in. You can see our water runs. And thankfully the water, although dirty, is clean enough for me to do these kind of corrections and touch-ups. All right, so now the obvious watercolor characteristic of paint running into an area unintentionally is now gone. Now there's still a smidgen on the drum head that I would prefer if it wasn't there. But if it does remain, it's not really the end of the world, because there's going to be some shadows on the drum head here and there. And if I can't get this gray out, I may do, over here I put a little bit of a pinky shadow on the edge of the drum, and I think I'm going to probably want to do that to differentiate it. Differentiate it from just the paint running. Now, we're looking at this drum head at an angle, so I think this should have come at that angle. That looks right, because if this is curving down here, it's going to be a really shallow. So yeah, I think that's the right curvature. And I'm going to gently put a little bit of darker paint outside of the circle. just a touch, just a, and I need it also in this one spot. So, you know, I can see up close little tiny areas where the water was causing some visual effects that I don't want in that area, especially since the dark is coming right up against that light colored drum head. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to let this dry, and I will be back. Well, it might not be until tomorrow. We'll see. I've got some things going on this afternoon. I'm sure I'll come down and check on those hairs after it's dry. But for now, I'm just going to leave it where we are at. And I will end the recording right here. I'll give you a quick farewell. I hope you enjoyed the painting session, and welcome you to join me again in the future. Thanks so much.